Certified case files. Genuine evidence. Objective truth. You are viewing bodycam incident reports.
Hey, don't move. What are you doing on this property?
This is my house. You're standing on my lawn.
Then show me some ID, right now.
You have no legal reason to demand that. I'm in my own yard.
Turn around, you're being detained.
Do not touch me. You are crossing
Stop
a line.
resisting, stop resisting.
I live here.
The body camera footage was shaky, the audio distorted by the sound of rushing water and the heavy breathing of Officer Brandon Miller. It was 10:15 a.m. on a sunny Saturday in the exclusive gated community of Oak Creek. What started as a rookie officer's proactive policing would end in a scene of chaos that would dominate national headlines for months. The woman being slammed face first into the muddy soil of her own front garden wasn't a burglar, and she wasn't the help. She was the Honorable Elena Vance, a 45-year-old Superior Court judge who had spent 2 decades putting actual criminals behind bars. She had no idea that her relaxing morning of gardening was about to turn into a nightmare that would expose the dark underbelly of racial profiling in suburban America, cost the city over $1 million, and prove that for some officers, a badge is nothing more than a license to bully. Before we unravel this shocking story of injustice and redemption, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that nobody should be arrested for gardening in their own home, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, the details of this case are going to make your blood boil. To understand the magnitude of this disaster, we first need to meet the woman at the center of the storm. Judge Elena Vance was a pillar of the legal community. At 45, she was one of the youngest judges appointed to the Superior Court in the state's history. Born to a working-class family in Detroit, she had clawed her way up through scholarships and 3 jobs to attend Yale Law School. She was known on the bench for her stern but fair sentencing, her encyclopedic knowledge of constitutional law, and her no-nonsense demeanor. But on Saturdays, the robes came off. For Judge Vance, gardening was therapy. It was her escape from the heavy burden of deciding the fates of others. She had lived in the Oak Creek neighborhood for 6 years. It was an enclave of doctors, tech CEOs, and lawyers, the kind of place where the grass was manicured with scissors and the homeowners' association fees cost more than most people's rent. Vance was one of the few black homeowners on her block, a fact that she rarely thought about until that Saturday. Dressed in an oversized university t-shirt, sweatpants, and a silk bonnet to protect her hair, she didn't look like Your Honor. She looked like a woman at peace. Enter Officer Brandon Miller. At 23 years old, Miller was fresh out of the police academy, a rookie in every sense of the word. He had been on the force for exactly 4 months. Miller was the product of a new wave of aggressive policing tactics taught by a specific training officer who believed that every citizen is a potential threat, and that sheepdogs must hunt the wolves. Miller was eager, adrenaline-fueled, and desperate to make a name for himself. He had requested a transfer to the Oak Creek Patrol District, believing that high-end neighborhoods were prime hunting grounds for burglars targeting wealthy homes. On paper, Miller had clean marks, but his field training notes hinted at a troubling arrogance. He had been reprimanded twice for command presence issues, police speak for being too aggressive too quickly. He viewed the community not as people to serve, but as a territory to conquer. That morning, Miller was on a solo patrol. As he cruised slowly down Sycamore Lane, his eyes scanned the driveways. He wasn't looking for speeders. He was profiling. When he saw a black woman in sweatpants standing in the front yard of a $2.5 million colonial-style estate, his bias kicked into overdrive. In his mind, she didn't fit the picture. She couldn't be the homeowner. She had to be the help, or worse, someone casing the joint. He slowed his cruiser to a crawl. Judge Vance noticed the car. She offered a polite, neighborly wave, the kind you give to the mailman or a passing jogger, and turned her back to continue watering her prize-winning hydrangeas. To Officer Miller, this wasn't a wave. It was dismissive behavior. It was suspicious. Why wasn't she acknowledging his authority? Why did she turn away so quickly? He parked the cruiser at the curb, blocking her driveway. The dash cam captured the moment he stepped out, adjusting his utility belt, his hand already hovering near his holster. He didn't walk with the casual gait of a community servant. He marched with the stiffness of a soldier entering a combat zone. "Excuse me," Miller shouted from the sidewalk. Judge Vance turned off the nozzle on her hose, the water slowing to a trickle. She shielded her eyes from the sun. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her voice calm, projecting the confidence of someone who speaks for a living. "Do you live here?" Miller asked, crossing the property line onto her lawn. "I do," Vance replied. "Is there a problem?" "I need to see some ID," Miller demanded, closing the distance between them. This was the first critical failure. Under the law, a citizen on their own private property is under no obligation to provide identification to law enforcement unless there is reasonable suspicion of a crime. Watering flowers is not a crime. Being black in a wealthy neighborhood is not a crime. "Officer," Vance said, her judicial tone creeping in, "I am in my own yard. I am not carrying my identification on me while I garden. And frankly, you have no reason to ask for it. Unless you can articulate a crime you suspect me of committing, I suggest you return to your vehicle." For Officer Miller, this was a challenge to his manhood and his badge. He had been taught that non-compliance was a prelude to attack. He didn't hear a citizen asserting her rights. He heard a suspect resisting authority. "I'm investigating a report of suspicious activity in the area," Miller lied. There was no report. Dispatch logs would later confirm this. "You match the description. Now show me ID or I'm detaining you." "I am not going inside to get my ID," Vance said firmly, turning back to her flowers. "You are trespassing. Please leave." "Turn around," Miller barked, his voice cracking with rage. "You are failing to comply with a lawful order." "It is not a lawful order," Vance snapped back, dropping the hose. "I know the law better than you do, son. I am a federal—" "I don't care what you are." Miller lunged forward. The escalation was instantaneous and brutal. Miller grabbed Judge Vance by the wrist, twisting her arm behind her back with excessive force. The hose, still leaking water, created a slick mud pit beneath their feet. Vance, caught off guard by the physical assault, lost her footing. "Get on the ground!" Miller screamed, using a leg sweep takedown he had learned in the academy gym. Judge Vance hit the earth hard. The breath was knocked out of her. Mud splashed onto her face and into her eyes. The humiliation was absolute. Here was a woman who commanded courtrooms, who had sent dangerous felons to prison, being treated like an animal in her own front yard. "You are making a mistake," she gasped, spitting dirt from her lip. "I am Judge Elena Vance. Look at the house. My name is on the mailbox." "Stop resisting," Miller yelled, pressing his knee into the small of her back, a maneuver that was technically banned for minor detainments due to the risk of positional asphyxia. He fumbled for his handcuffs. The commotion had drawn attention. Next door, Mr. Thomas Henderson, a 68-year-old retired architect and the head of the Homeowners Association, ran out in his bathrobe. He had known Elena Vance for years. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Henderson shouted, running toward the property line. "That's Elena. She lives there. Get off her." Miller panicked and, flooded with adrenaline, whipped his head around. Back up, or your next obstruction of justice." "You're an idiot," Henderson yelled, pulling out his phone to record. "She's a judge, you moron. Let her up." The word judge seemed to bounce off Miller's brain without sticking. He was too far gone, too committed to the narrative that he was subduing a hostile suspect. He clicked the handcuffs onto Vance's wrists, tightening them to the point of pain. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and failure to identify—" Miller panted, hauling her to her feet. Vance's t-shirt was torn. Her cheek was bleeding from a scrape against a landscaping rock, and her bonnet had fallen off, leaving her hair exposed and messy. She looked at the young officer, not with fear, but with a terrifyingly cold fury. "Officer," she said, her voice shaking only slightly, "you have just ended your career. I hope it was worth it." Miller shoved her toward the squad car. Yeah. Tell it to the sergeant." Backup arrived in the form of Sergeant Keith Kowalski, a veteran officer who was 2 years away from retirement. He pulled up as Miller was stuffing Judge Vance into the back of the cruiser. Kowalski was known for being lazy, the kind of supervisor who rubber-stamped his subordinates' reports just to avoid paperwork. He walked over to Miller, who was wiping mud from his uniform. "What do we have, rookie?" Female subject uncooperative, Miller said, his chest heaving. Refused ID, resisted detention, neighbors are getting hostile. Kowalski looked at the back of the cruiser. He saw a black woman in dirty clothes. He didn't bother to knock on the window or ask her side of the story. He didn't check the mailbox. He didn't talk to Mr. Henderson, who was still screaming from the sidewalk. He just wanted to get back to his coffee. Book her, Kowalski said. Disorderly and resisting. Good job staying safe. That decision, Kowalski's failure to investigate his blind faith in a rookie's biased assessment, would make him a co-defendant in the inevitable lawsuit. Judge Vance was driven to the 4th Precinct. The ride was silent. She sat in the back, handcuffed, her mind racing not with panic but with legal strategy. She was memorizing details, the speed of the car, the officer's failure to read her Miranda rights, the time on the dashboard clock. She was building her case file in her head. The intake process was where the reality of the situation finally crashed into the precinct's incompetence. The booking sergeant, a woman named Officer Reynolds, asked for Vance's name. Elena Marie Vance, she said clearly. Date of birth, August 4th, 1980. Reynolds typed the name into the system. Her eyes widened. She stopped typing. She looked at the mugshot on the screen from Vance's judicial ID badge, which popped up in the law enforcement database as a protected official. She looked at the woman in the muddy sweatpants. She looked back at the screen. Miller, Reynolds whispered, her face draining of color. Come here. What? Miller asked, filling out his arrest report. You arrested a Superior Court judge, Reynolds hissed. It says right here, active judiciary status. Do not detain without warrant or felony cause. Miller laughed nervously. No way. She's lying. She didn't have ID. It's in the system, you idiot, Reynolds shouted, causing the entire booking room to go silent. She's Judge Vance. She sits at the downtown courthouse. I've seen her on the news. The captain came out of his office. Within 10 minutes, the handcuffs were off. The police chief was on the phone, apologizing profusely. They offered to drive her home. They offered to wash her clothes. They tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding. Judge Vance stood in the lobby of the police station, still covered in the dirt from her own garden. She refused the ride home. She called her husband to pick her up. Before she left, she looked Officer Miller in the eye. He was standing in the corner, looking less like a warrior and more like a terrified child. I will see you in court, she said, and this time I won't be the one in handcuffs. The charges were dropped before she even left the building. But as Judge Vance knew, the absence of criminal charges does not equal justice. The violation had occurred. The trauma was inflicted. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit hit the city clerk's desk with the weight of a sledgehammer. Vance v. City of Oak Creek, Officer Brandon Miller and Sergeant Keith Kowalski. The suit alleged Fourth Amendment violations, unlawful seizure, excessive force, false arrest, and racial profiling. The city's response was typical defensive posturing. They claimed qualified immunity, the legal doctrine that protects government officials from liability unless they violate clearly established rights. Their lawyers argued that Miller made an honest mistake in the heat of the moment, and that Vance's refusal to provide ID was obstructive behavior that justified the detention. It was a weak argument, but it was all they had. They hoped Vance would settle quickly to avoid the publicity. They underestimated her. She didn't want a quick settlement. She wanted the truth on the record. The discovery phase, the process where lawyers exchange evidence, was where the case blew wide open. Judge Vance's legal team, led by a shark of a civil rights attorney named Marcus Thorne, subpoenaed Officer Miller's phone records and text messages. What they found destroyed any defense the city had. 3 weeks before the arrest, Miller had been added to a group chat with other rookies from his academy class. The chat was named The Wolf Pack. In a text sent just 2 days before he arrested Judge Vance, Miller wrote, "Finally got assigned to Oak Creek. Gonna go hunting in the rich neighborhoods. Sick of these people thinking they own the place just because they have money. Especially the ones who don't look like they belong. You know what I mean. Especially the ones who don't look like they belong." It was a smoking gun. It proved that his suspicion of Judge Vance wasn't based on behavior. It was based on race. He didn't see a homeowner. He saw a black woman in a space he believed she didn't deserve to occupy. The trial began 6 months later. It was a media circus. The courtroom was packed. Outside, protesters held signs reading "Gardening While Black" and "Justice for Judge Vance." Judge Vance took the stand. It was a surreal moment, a judge testifying from the witness box. She spoke with a quiet, devastating dignity. "I have spent 20 years believing in the system," she told the jury. "I tell defendants that the law is fair, that if they respect authority, they will be treated with respect. And as I lay in the mud of my own garden with a man's knee in my back, realizing that my title, my education, and my conduct meant absolutely nothing to him because of the color of my skin, I felt a part of me break. I wasn't a judge in that moment. I was just another body to be subdued." There wasn't a dry eye in the jury box. Then came Officer Miller. His defense attorney tried to paint him as a confused young man trying to protect the neighborhood. But on cross-examination, Marcus Thorne tore him apart. "Officer Miller," Thorne said, pacing in front of the jury, "you stated you suspected my client of burglary. Did you see any broken windows?" "No," Miller mumbled. "Did you see any pry bars, any bags of loot?" "No." "You saw a woman watering flowers. Tell me, officer, in your training, is horticulture listed as a precursor to a felony?" "No." "You asked her if she lived there. She said yes. Why didn't you believe her?" She didn't look like the homeowner," Miller said, walking into the trap. "Why?" Thorne pounced. "Because she was wearing sweatpants or because she was black?" I don't see color," Miller stammered, using the worst possible cliché. "Your text messages suggest otherwise," Thorne said, holding up the printout of the Wolfpack chat. "You went hunting, didn't you? And you found exactly what you were looking for, a victim." The jury didn't need long. They deliberated for 4 hours. They found Officer Miller, Sergeant Kowalski, and the city of Oak Creek liable on all counts. They awarded Judge Vance $1.2 million in compensatory damages for the emotional distress and violation of rights. But they didn't stop there. To send a message, they added $500,000 in punitive damages directly against Officer Miller, ensuring he would never financially recover. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Officer Brandon Miller was fired immediately. The state revocation board stripped him of his law enforcement certification, meaning he could never work as a cop again in that state or likely any other. At 24, his career was over. He was last reported working as a security guard for a trucking depot, earning minimum wage and still facing the crushing debt of the civil judgment. Sergeant Kowalski was forced into early retirement with a reduced pension. His laziness and failure to supervise had cost the city a fortune. The Oak Creek Police Department underwent a federally mandated overhaul. The warrior cop training was banned. New protocols were installed requiring supervisors to physically review the scene of any arrest involving a homeowner on their own property. But what about Judge Vance? She returned to the bench, but she was different. Her rulings became more nuanced. She scrutinized police testimony with a laser focus she hadn't possessed before. She became a champion for Fourth Amendment rights, often giving lectures at law schools about the dangers of implicit bias. However, the victory came with a personal cost. She never truly felt safe in her garden again. She installed security cameras. She rarely gardened without her phone in her pocket. The sanctuary of her hydrangeas had been tainted by the memory of the mud and the handcuffs. Have you ever felt profiled or judged by someone in power based on how you looked? Let me know in the comments below. It's a reality for too many people, and stories like this remind us why we have to keep cameras rolling. So, what is the lesson here? It's easy to look at the $1.7 million payout and say justice was served. But money doesn't erase trauma. The real lesson is about the danger of unchecked authority and the fragility of freedom. Officer Miller had a badge, a gun, and the power of the state behind him. He thought that made him invincible. He thought he could define who belonged in that neighborhood and who didn't. He forgot that in America, authority is granted by the people, and it can be taken away by the law. He forgot that a badge is a shield to protect, not a sword to hunt. Judge Vance's story is a warning to every public servant. When you let prejudice guide your actions, you don't just destroy your victim's trust, you destroy your own future. Bias is a blindfold, And as Officer Miller learned the hard way, if you wear it long enough, you'll walk right off a cliff. Thanks for watching. If you found this story powerful, please share it. We need to keep shining a light on these injustices until the day comes when a woman can water her flowers in peace, no matter the color of her skin. Stay safe, know your rights, and I'll see you in the next video.
Case officially closed. For more authentic law enforcement footage, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for joining Bodycam Incident Reports.